Hey everybody, Professor Snart here on checking in on Friday morning. So we've just wrapped up our first unit in our 8-week 1102 class here. So Thursday was our first due date, again paying attention to that sort of dual due date system that we've got where any unit, like the first one that has that discussion board or any kind of like a reply component. So we had that first due date by noon and then replies by the end of the day. It gives a little window for people to finish up the one and then not be rushing necessarily to do the other. It's not a ton of time, but we work pretty quickly in that 8-week format. And so now you want to be on to Unit 2. Again, maybe working on the weekend a little bit, but at least you've got that Friday and part of the Monday, right? Again, attending to our double due date system here. And then a fairly quick turnaround from that to Unit 3. So we do move, relatively quickly. So it's always good to be looking at the immediate due date, but also kind of the one that's coming up, and even sort of popping into multiple units at a time. If not to do the work, then at least to get a sense of the scope of, is there a reading to do, which will take a little while? Is there a longer project to do, so you can, manage your time effectively? So Unit 1 was really just about introductions, and now we begin to get more into the content of our course. First, a little unit that has us thinking about literature a little bit, which is kind of like what the basis for our course, or at least the subject for our course, the type of readings that we do, even though it's fundamentally a writing course or a composition course, which is largely what we get into in Unit 3. So I'm going to actually look at both of these right now. So as the unit objectives outline, we want to take a little bit of time to talk about and think about plagiarism. It can be in some ways a complicated or a nuanced kind of thing. There's ways that it can be something more complicated than just copying, but those tend to be the rare exceptions. And especially because of the type of writing that we do, the type of subject matter we're writing about, plagiarism in our situation here is usually a pretty cut and dry case, and I rarely see it, to be honest with you. But every once in a while it'll pop up, so it's good that we cover that base here early, and then it's not something that we really return to in any focused sense as we move through our course. So there is some stuff about plagiarism, what it is. Most people, again, kind of know the basics. And it's a good idea maybe for you to review the plagiarism policy, although it's pretty straightforward. You just sort of receive an F for the course. It's not real complicated. So clearly, and I guess I'll say this then, in my experience, plagiarism is not something that people begin a course thinking, I'm going to cheat my way through this course. I don't think like that's the small minority, and I don't know that I've ever run into that kind of a situation. But when it occurs, again, in my experience, it tends to be right at the end of a course. The big, essay is due, and maybe people haven't managed their time very well, so they're crunched for time, and there's a lot of points riding on it, and they're thinking about their grade, and they sort of back themselves into a corner and just sort of panic. So it's not like a planned thing. So we cover avoiding plagiarism in the more typical sense of like, what is it? Make sure you cite your sources, all stuff that we really do throughout the course anyway. But for me, avoiding plagiarism is largely just about managing your time so you don't back yourself into that corner and then, panic and sort of make a bad choice. So we cover it here really early in Unit 2. Obviously, our course is a sort of like a research-based course. The writing we do involves sources, so we spend a lot of time about how to cite them, how to find them, how to incorporate them in your work. So again, we don't talk about plagiarism directly, but once we've covered it here, the rest of our course is about the research process. So it's sort of in the background, but not really. Okay, so you can work through that. We cover it, and then we don't really need to think about it too much. There are a couple of handouts here you can grab about literary terms. Again, not because our course is a literature course, but it just gives you a useful vocabulary for talking about the works that we'll be studying. And again, it can help to make the writing part of our course, the composition part, more effective because you're using terminology that fits with the subject matter. And there's a little quiz here, but you can have the handouts open in front of you. It's, not that complicated. Okay, so then we have our first reading from the textbook, which is not a work of literature, but more of an introductory thing, this question of what is literature. So it gets us into the book, and we have another discussion board here. You may want to review the grading guidelines here that gives a little overview of how the discussion boards are graded, at least in a kind of general sense. But again, this is the main work for the unit, so a few sentences that just seem to be dashed off at the last minute are really not going to cut it. So just meeting the requirement is not an A necessarily. So you really do want to develop a pretty extensive post here, making sure you're quoting from the reading that we're doing. We're not too concerned about how to cite it since we haven't covered that, so don't worry about it. And then you want to make sure that you respond to 2 other posts. And again, the responses are important as well, so you don't just want to dash a quick, oh, yeah, I agree, or I hadn't thought of that. You can have that response, but then develop it a little bit more. So in some ways, the replies should be as long, as developed, as thoughtful as your main post. That really helps to establish that sense of like conversation that we're looking for in the class, that we might like to have in a face-to-face environment. That our version here online is when we can do a discussion board and have some developed responses like that. Okay, so a fairly, I would say, low impact unit. It lays some groundwork, so at least we've covered plagiarism and gets us started thinking about the kind of subject matter that we'll be looking at to base our essays on, but not a lot of heavy lifting here. Unit 3, though, is, I think, one of the most important that we cover as far as just basic principles for our composition class. So not so much the literature stuff, which is just secondary for us, but the actual writing part. And you'll notice here that it's grouped into different folders that gets us to our first, I guess it's sort of a major writing assignment. It's only a paragraph, but it's the first formal writing assignment, let's say that, in our course. But obviously you want to take some time and manage your time effectively and work through, the material, the sort of content here before getting to the writing assignment. So don't jump to the thing to do and sort of like skip going to class almost. That would be like showing up for the test but not having gone to any of the class meetings. So there's some video stuff to watch, the same sort of concepts delivered more in a static form here with our little stick figure, some explanation, right? So as you can see, I'm scrolling fast here, but there's substantially more content here to work through than maybe in our previous units. And remember, this is just the one folder of the multiple that are in this unit. So again, looking at this now, and just budgeting your time effectively, I think is really important. There's some stuff on MLA citation, obviously a big part of our research/composition part, and then the paragraph assignment itself. I won't go too much into this right now. You can obviously read it in Blackboard, but we'll also catch up with this in a next video announcement. So the last thing that I wanted to say then, I'm going to go into our due dates here. As we get into the course, you'll obviously be getting grades for the work that you're doing. So there's a couple of things to think about. First of all, early units, especially like the introductions unit, you can get a good grade by just introducing yourself and replying. So I'm not grading the quality of the work or providing feedback on sentence structure or, that kind of stuff. But that will obviously be part of what we have to look at, like with the paragraph assignment in Unit 3, and certainly once we get to our major essays, kind of like halfway through the course and then towards the end. So I guess what I'm saying is that if you did well, in these early discussion boards, don't kind of get lazy or think that you can do that same kind of writing in the major essay assignments and have it earn the same grade, because we're sort of measuring two different things, if that makes sense. And a related thing that I really want you to be conscious of as we work through our course here is always to think of the grade that you're getting in terms of the raw point value. So our entire course is out of 1,000 points. It kind of makes for easy math. Most of those points are loaded into, like you can guess, the major essay assignment. So essay number 1 here, and then our final essay right down at the tail end of our course. So most of the points are there. So we've worked through things like discussion boards that are maybe 25, even 50 points. So if you do a pretty good post and the replies, maybe let's say you get a 40 out of 50. So I really want you to think about that just as 40. In other words, you missed 10 out of 1,000 points. But I think sometimes what happens is people see that 40 out of 50 or whatever the the raw number is, and then think, oh, that's an 80%, or oh, that's a low B. But it's really not. I mean, it calculates that way, but it doesn't have that impact on your overall grade because it's only those points out of the whole 1,000. So I would say something like a 40 out of 50. You certainly could have done better, but that's still pretty good, right? It's just not right above and beyond. And again, you can review the grading guidelines, but always think in terms of the raw number, not, oh no, that's a B or that's a low B or it's an 80% or whatever. That it sort of gives it more weight than it actually has. All right, so as we go through, keep that in mind. Again, Unit 2 I think is relatively straightforward, not too demanding. We really want those discussion board posts developed, and as well as the replies. And then I think Unit 3 is kind of like the keystone unit in terms of the principles about composition that we want to study and have in place as we then move into other parts of our course. If you have any questions or concerns, by all means be in touch, and I'll talk with everybody soon.